Welcome back, everybody. Today we're looking at a book that really set things in motion. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring.
Oh, yeah.
It first came out in 1962, and it's really a deep look at the dangers that are hiding with pesticides.
Right.
We're going to be talking about the possible consequences of us just using chemicals with no control and how one person's voice can actually change the world.
It's crazy how Carson starts the book. She talks about a fictional town,
Oh, yeah?
and it's completely silent because of all the pesticides.
Wow.
It's like a really powerful symbol of what could happen if we just keep using chemicals without thinking.
It's a serious warning, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Carson's not shy about telling us we have to protect our planet.
Right.
Especially when you think about all the synthetic chemicals that were being made back then.
Yeah.
And, they're not like natural stuff that breaks down over time. These synthetic chemicals, they stick around and they contaminate everything.
It's true.
Did you find that scary when you first read the book?
Absolutely. I mean, it's unsettling to think about all these chemicals like DDT being sprayed everywhere.
Right.
And nobody really knew what would happen in the long run. In the chapter, Elixirs of Death, Carson gets into the science,
Yeah.
She explains how these chemicals attack the nervous system.
Wow.
And not just in bugs, but in all living things.
That's the scary part.
It is.
They were spraying these chemicals everywhere without understanding how they'd affect the environment or our health.
Exactly.
And speaking of contamination, that chapter about water is really disturbing.
Yeah.
What stood out to you about that section?
Well, Carson reveals how these pesticides get into our water systems.
Everywhere.
Yeah. Rivers, lakes, even the groundwater we drink.
It's scary.
It really shows us how everything is connected. What we put into the environment comes back to affect us all.
And what's really interesting? Carson talks about this web of life idea.
Oh, yeah.
It shows that the impact goes way beyond just the pests they're trying to kill.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a really smart way to show how everything is connected. Pesticides might be aimed at one bug,
Right.
but they end up hurting so many other species, birds, fish mammals.
Oh, yeah.
They all become victims in this chemical war.
It's like a domino effect.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes these pest control efforts completely backfire. Like when they tried to get rid of fire ants with pesticides,
Oh, right.
it ended up hurting more than just the ants.
The consequences were huge.
Right.
It just shows that we need to understand how nature works
Yeah.
before we try to mess with it. But let's
Yeah.
talk about that chapter that gave the book its name, And No Birds Sing.
That's the one that really gets to you emotionally.
Oh, yeah.
Carson paints this really sad picture of how DDT destroyed bird populations. It built up in their bodies and caused problems with reproduction.
Right.
It led to fewer birds and even some going extinct. It's hard to imagine a world without birds singing.
The silence of the birds is a powerful symbol. It's a warning sign that something is seriously wrong in our environment.
And it's not just birds. Carson shows us that pesticides hurt people too.
Yeah, that's where it hits close to home.
She talks about studies that link pesticides to cancer, neurological problems, and a bunch of other health issues.
Right.
What's even more unsettling is that we still don't fully understand what these chemicals will do to us in the long run.
It's a scary thought, especially when you think about how they didn't really regulate these chemicals back then.
Yeah.
But there's another side to this whole human cost thing.
What's that?
Pest resistance.
Oh, yeah. It's like we're fighting a losing battle. The more we use these chemicals, the more resistant the pests become.
Exactly.
We have to use stronger and stronger doses to get the same result.
And it just ends up hurting us more than the pests.
So where do we go from here?
Well, thankfully, Carson gives us some hope. She talks about a better way to deal with pests, a more sustainable approach. She talks about things like biological controls, using nature's own defenses to our advantage.
I like that.
And there's integrated pest management, which is all about using less chemicals and promoting a more balanced ecosystem.
Those are important ideas.
They are. And
Yeah.
it's worth noting that Silent Spring had a massive impact. The book led to DDT being banned in many countries.
Wow.
And it helped start the modern environmental movement. It even influenced the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency.
What an incredible legacy. But stepping back for a second, Silent Spring isn't just about pesticides.
No, it's not.
It's a wake-up call about how we treat the natural world.
Exactly. It reminds us that we're all connected, humans, animals, plants, everything.
We're all in this together.
We are, and it's important to take care of the planet.
As we continue to look at Silent Spring, I think you'll find some interesting historical parallels in the chapter Beyond the Dreams of the Borgias.
Oh, yeah.
It's a fascinating chapter.
It is. Carson connects how we use pesticides today to how people used poison throughout history. It puts things in perspective. Our desire to control nature has led us down some pretty dark paths before.
That's
It
true.
makes you think, it does, about what we're doing now and where it might lead us. It really makes you wonder, are we making the same mistakes again? But let's go back to the science for a minute.
Right.
In the chapter, Through a Narrow Window, Carson looks at how these chemicals affect us, like, down to our cells.
Yeah.
It's pretty complicated stuff.
It is. She explains how these man-made chemicals can mess up our biology,
Right.
causing mutations and birth defects and all sorts of other health problems, like a chain reaction,
Yes.
starting really small and then spreading out.
What's really worrying is that we still don't totally get how this exposure to chemicals will affect us way down the line.
It's true.
There's so much we're still figuring out about how these things interact with our bodies over time.
And that's what makes Carson's message so important. She's not just pointing fingers.
Right.
She's saying, hey, we need more research, more transparency, and we need to be more careful about how we regulate chemicals.
She's basically saying, hold on a sec. We need to think more about what we're putting into the environment and our bodies. And that brings us to one of the most powerful chapters, 1 in every 4.
Oh, yeah.
This is where Carson talks about the rising number of cancer cases and the possibility that it's connected to things in the environment, including pesticides.
That was a bold thing to say, especially back then. Did you find her arguments convincing?
Absolutely. Carson lays out all this evidence linking chemicals to different types of cancer.
Okay.
She also calls out the chemical industry for trying to downplay the risks of their products.
It's like David and Goliath.
Totally.
One scientist taking on these huge companies.
Yeah.
It really shows you how brave Carson was and how determined she was to tell the truth.
And that theme of nature fighting back continues in the next chapter.
Nature fights back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
In this chapter, Carson looks at this thing called pest resistance.
Right.
The more we rely on these chemical solutions,
Yeah.
the less they actually work. And we just end up using more and more of them. It's a vicious cycle. Have you ever had this happen in your own garden or at home?
Oh, yeah. All the time. It's so annoying when you're trying to get rid of pests.
Mm-hmm.
And you just need stronger and stronger chemicals.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder if there's a better way.
And that's what's so insightful about Carson's work. She shows us a different way of looking at things.
She does.
She emphasizes the need to move away from this idea that we can dominate nature
Yeah,
and towards a more balanced approach.
I like that.
Yeah.
And the chapter, The Rumblings of an Avalanche, feels especially relevant right now.
Oh, absolutely. It's like she's speaking directly to us today.
It is.
Carson warns that if we keep doing what we're doing, we could be headed for a massive environmental collapse.
It's a scary thought.
It is. She argues that our use of pesticides is just one sign of a much bigger problem,
Yeah.
that we're not living sustainably.
They were not in balance with nature.
Exactly. It's a serious warning, but it's also a call to action.
I agree.
It's a push for us to think about the choices we're making and the consequences they could have. And thankfully, Carson doesn't leave us feeling totally hopeless. In the last chapter, The Other Road, she gives us a little bit of hope.
I like that this is where she talks about a more sustainable future.
Yeah.
A future where we embrace ecological principles
Right.
and recognize that everything is connected.
She talks about using things like biological controls, natural predators, and integrated pest management strategies.
That's smart.
It is. It's about working with nature instead of fighting against it.
It's a beautiful vision, but it requires us to really change the way we think and the way we act.
And that's the real power of Silent Spring.
What do you mean?
It's not just a science book, it's a call to action. It's a call for us to step up and be responsible for our planet.
It's a reminder that our choices have an impact not just on us, but on every living thing.
And as we face all these environmental challenges today, climate change, plastic pollution,
Right.
Carson's message is more important than ever.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a legacy that continues to inspire us and push us to protect this fragile web of life that keeps us all alive. It makes you realize that we're not separate from nature. We're part of it.
Right. What we do affects the whole ecosystem.
Exactly. And that's why we have to think about what happens in the long run when we make choices, especially about things like using pesticides.
It's not just about getting rid of bugs, it's about understanding how nature works.
And realizing that there are usually better ways to deal with these problems. Carson was all about working with nature, not fighting it.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that idea today with the growing movement toward organic farming.
Yeah.
And people are more aware of how important biodiversity is. And there's a push for environmental policies that make sense.
It's great to see that change in how people think, but don't you think there's still a lot to do?
Oh, definitely. We've got some big environmental problems right now. Climate change, plastic pollution.
Oh, yeah.
But I think the things we've learned from Silent Spring can help us figure out how to deal with all this.
I agree. It's about recognizing that everything's connected, understanding that what we do has consequences,
Yeah.
and pushing for solutions that are good for people and the environment.
Exactly. It's about taking responsibility, like Carson talked about.
Yeah.
It's about knowing we can actually make a difference.
So as we finish up our look at Silent Spring, let's take that message with us.
Yes, let's remember how brave Carson was, her dedication to science, and how committed she was to protecting the planet.
Let's remember that we all have a part to play in making a healthier and more sustainable future.
Whether it's through the choices we make, getting involved in our communities, or speaking up for change.
Because Silent Spring isn't just about what happened in the past, it's about the future we choose to make.
And that's a future worth fighting for.